I am Shawn Lucas, and I'm Assistant Professor of Organic Agriculture, and I'm the Industrial Hemp Specialist here at Kentucky State University. We are an 1890s land grant university, historically black college, and our mission is to serve underrepresented and under-resourced farmers and minority farmers in the state of Kentucky and beyond. I do not have my own farm. Most of the farming I do is here at Kentucky State University, although I have worked with Tony Silvernail yesterday. He and I grew about 3 acres of hemp last year, or certified organic hemp. So I mean, I have some limited outside of academia farming experience, but I've been involved in agriculture since about 1999. I was at St. Catherine College before I came here to Kentucky State. I was in the berry farming program named after Wendell Berry, who is, you're over here going. Wendell is a farmer, a poet, an activist. I mean, Wendell does a lot of good things. And I cherished the 2 years that I had in that program and getting to spend time with Wendell Berry and Mary Berry. But Mike was a student in that program, and Mike and I hit it off pretty early on, and he came to me with the idea that we should grow hemp on the farm that we just purchased for the berry farming program at St. Catherine College. And this is a small college in Washington County, Kentucky, and it is associated with the Sisters of Dominican Peace. So a bunch of Catholic nuns, and Mike says, "Hey, we just got this land. Let's grow some hemp on it." I said, "Mike, we'll probably have to have some conversations with the administration and then with the nuns, right?" But when the sisters learned that we were coming at it from the perspective of this is a potentially new crop that could be beneficial to farmers. If we manage it right, it can be beneficial to the ecosystem. They were all about it. And so it really wasn't that hard to convince the sisters that it was a good idea to grow hemp. And we grew probably about 2 acres of hemp on that farm. That was the first thing that was grown on the university farm, or the college farm. So that was a lot of fun. And Mike and I have been working together ever since. He graduated in 2016, and of course, unfortunately, St. Catherine closed in 2016. So I was very fortunate that I was able to land on my feet here at Kentucky State, and really didn't miss a beat as far as being able to keep on doing what I was doing with both hemp research and agroecosystems studies and education. Hemp is, that's a complicated question. You know, we know more about what hemp is now than we did 5 years ago, and we spent the last 4.5 to 5 years presenting hemp as an opportunity, and that I think it's still an opportunity, but 2019 has presented a lot of challenges. So, hemp is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It is a opportunity for farmers under the right circumstances. It is a healthcare supplement to a lot of people. It's a potential animal feed. It is a potential source of fiber and things like graphene that can be used in all kinds of technological applications. So hemp is a lot of things. It depends on what you want to use it for, and there are a lot of potential uses. Primarily, people are using it for the fiber or the grain, or really the vast majority of people that are cultivating right now, at least up till 2019 going into 2020, people are cultivating for cannabinoid extraction. And the focus has been on cannabidiol, CBD, but as we learn more about the chemistry of the plant, people are increasingly becoming interested in some of the other cannabinoids in the plant. So from there, you can branch into lots of different things. Fiber can be used for anything from textile to animal bedding. That's actually more the herd of the plant, but that's a byproduct of fiber production. And insulation. Certain car manufacturers are using it as filler in the interior door panels of their cars. Hempcrete relies on the fiber. So the fibers are very diversified. You got lots of options with it. The grain, again, is something that can be pressed for oil, and that oil is pretty nutritious. It's got a lot of omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids, good for you. It's not really great for cooking at higher temperatures, but it is a good oil that can be used in things like dressings and other things that you might use oil for in a culinary setting. The seeds themselves are very nutritious. Again, those fatty acids are good for you, so people can eat the seeds, and that's a product that people have been interested in, is hemp hearts. Animal feed, the potential for it, FDA has not come down with a regulation yet on whether or not we can use hemp in animal feed, but I know a lot of people are very interested in that possibility. It's high protein, and again, those fatty acids do the same things for the animals that they do for the people. So it's got a lot of potential uses on the grain side. And then, of course, what we've been growing for, again, since 2015 or so, primarily has been cannabinoid extraction. And the range of potential benefits still need a lot of research, but it has been touted as an anti-inflammatory, anti-seizure, anti-anxiety, and all these things are things that we need much more research on. But there is a lot of, and increasingly there is more peer-reviewed research backing some of these claims, particularly the anti-seizure claims, has some good backing in the scientific literature now. So, there are a lot of potential uses, and I'm sure that people are innovative and creative and are going to find more uses for products from this plant. First got into working with hemp because I thought it was an interesting way to introduce a new crop into diversified agricultural ecosystems. We hadn't grown this crop in the landscape for 50 some years or more, and being an organic specialist, anything that can diversify your crop rotations and add another potential component to a farmer's palate, if you will, that they could put into a diversified agroecosystem, because diversity is a thing. I mean, if you're diversified, you're not putting all your economic eggs in one basket. If you're diversified, you're not drawing the same range of nutrients from the soil all the time, because different plants have different nutrient profiles. If you're diversified, you're not attracting the same pests, right? And so I thought it was a neat way to add another layer into these agroecosystems. I've always been interested in the multiple uses of hemp and cannabis, and so I really think that when the opportunity came to work with it, I wanted to learn as much about this crop as I could. We're interested in the problems associated with hemp. Hemp is a very multi-use, multi-purpose crop, and every facet of hemp has potential problems that can go with it. As we are learning about it in the agricultural landscape, we are finding more and more pest problems. This crop has not been grown for 50 some years, and it's taken the pests a couple years to figure out that they like hemp. But there have been there's a long history of pests infecting cannabis. And now that it's being grown at a wide scale in the fields, we're seeing some newer pests come into the play. So things like the corn earworm was a bad problem last year here in Kentucky, where it was boring into the buds and shearing them off at the stem, and you just get big patches of brown bud in your flowers. And there are some new fungal pathogens. One of my colleagues at University of Kentucky over in Lexington has discovered a new bipolaris species fungus that affects hemp. And normally this fungus doesn't jump off of grasses very often. It usually is its normal habitat is grasses, but it's jumped to hemp, and we don't know why. So agriculturally, you're getting a lot of the same problems that you get with lots of crops: pests, diseases. If you're growing in organic systems, weed control is a big problem. Up to this point, relearning how to grow the crop has been a challenge for a lot of people. If you're growing for fiber and grain and direct seeding, it's real tricky. You've got to get that seed just under the surface, about 1/4 inch. If you get it too deep, your weeds are going to germinate before the hemp germinates, and your weeds are going to smother out your hemp. And particularly if you're working in an organic system, because our weed control tools are limited there. So it's from an agricultural perspective, we're learning how to manage the crop and what some of those agricultural problems are. There is an educational problem with hemp. There are still a lot of people that equate low THC cannabis with high THC cannabis, and all of the stigmas that have been placed on high THC cannabis. So hemp is obviously 0.3% THC or less according to the rules that we're working with. My opinion is that some of those rules are pretty arbitrary. I think that the 0.3% THC threshold is very arbitrary, based on not bad science, but based on data that was incorrectly used from research that was done in the 70s on leaf material. And we're basing this test that, we're basing this 0.3% threshold on research that used young plants and the leaves from young plants, which can be 1/10 the potency of flowers. And we're taking that data and extrapolating it to flowers now that have much higher concentrations on average than leaves. And so why are we using a test based on young leaves to regulate mature flower? It's far too conservative, in my opinion. And a lot of the evidence out there points to 1% THC might be a more reasonable threshold that takes a lot of risk off the farmer and still isn't going to be used for intoxication purposes, if that's what people are looking for. Especially given that a lot of the high THC cannabis out there is, 15 to 20% or more THC. People aren't really looking for 1% THC to have a party. So there's a lot of education that needs to go on, both in the consumer side, and that's not a problem. I think it's an opportunity on the consumer side and on the legislative side and the policy side. There's all kinds of education we still need to address and get out there for people to have a better understanding of this plant. And then, you have the market side of the plant. And last year was the first year after the 2018 Farm Bill. 2018 Farm Bill gave us the framework for which we're going to grow hemp going forward. Took it off the controlled substances list. And a lot of people thought, hey, I am going to get into hemp and I'm going to get in full bore now. I've heard of people growing 300 acres of hemp for cannabinoid extraction, which is high labor, high intensity management, and it's still frankly, it's a high risk crop as far as, what you're going to put into it and what you can potentially get out of it financially. So you had this influx of all these people coming in to grow. A lot of them were new farmers, or at least new to hemp farmers. At the same time, you had a lot of extraction companies, because right now, at least in Kentucky, the only way we can move our flower is to a processor. We are not allowed to sell raw flower on the market in Kentucky. Other states have different legislation, but at least in Kentucky, you cannot sell flower to anybody who doesn't have a permit to process that flower. So it's a little bit of a bottleneck in the way that Kentucky operates. And so that has made it challenging, at least in Kentucky, and I know it has in other states too, where you have processors that have anticipated getting investments. The investments didn't come through. The processors couldn't upscale their infrastructure to accommodate the amount of flour being grown, and now you have all this flour sitting in warehouses or barns. The barns are probably one of the worst case scenarios because that's not climate controlled and you're potentially losing the value of your product. And so the market has essentially taken a nosedive from where it was in 2018. I think in 2018, people were getting roughly $35 a pound for 10% CBD hemp. And that was down to $7.40 a pound for a 10% CBD crop January of this year. Having a diversified agroecosystem means that you have lots of different plants that you're growing. Those plants encourage crops that you're growing. And some of those are crops that you want to plant to harvest and make money on. And some of those are crops that you're planting just to benefit your ecosystem, to encourage pollinators or to build soil carbon, right? And so those are things like cover crops, summer cover crops, winter cover crops, pollinator crops. So you have all kinds of different potential crops, and then you can overlay livestock on all that. One of the things that I'm most interested in outside of hemp is a project that we've got going on here at Kentucky State, where we're looking at integrating goats into an organic crop rotation. And so we have 5 years of a rotation. 2 years we're growing organic corn and organic soybean, and the other 3 years we have goats on pasture. And so again, the purpose behind that is to build the soil. When you are tilling up the soil to plant crops, and we do a lot more tillage in organic than we'd like. Tillage is bad for the soil. It breaks down carbon. It causes you to lose some of your microorganisms. But you can build that stuff back up through use of cover crops and also through letting your soil rest, putting it into pasture, putting animals on that landscape and letting them urinate and defecate on the landscape. That's all putting nutrients back into the soil, organic material back into the soil. The pasture itself is putting roots into the soil, and that above ground biomass that the goats are stimulating. If you manage it right, the goats aren't chomping that stuff all the way down to the ground. You're letting them chomp it about halfway, and then you're moving them to the next area, and that grass grows back more lush, and the roots are stimulated to grow deeper. And so the more you encourage that pasture growth over 3 years, you're building that soil organic matter and building that microbial community back up from where you left it at the end of your cropping cycle. So that's another aspect of diversity. So again, any opportunity for farmers to not have all their eggs in one basket. If you've got some kind of horrible disease that comes through and wipes out your hemp crop, for example, but you're also growing tomatoes, peppers, maybe some wheat, winter wheat in your fields, things like that, you're not going to be solely reliant on that income from the hemp, and so it buffers your market options. HIA can help with a lot of these problems by continuing to do what they have done over the years in terms of making the public aware of the value of hemp, the uses of hemp. Advocating for farmers is one area where I think not just the HIA, but everybody involved in hemp really needs to step up their game. And I know that the HIA being involved in the board, both at the at the state level and being very well acquainted with some of the administrative folks at the national level, I know that AHIA is really trying to address that. Because again, what happened at the end of 2019 with the market and the way that the farmers have sort of been left holding the bag, literally the bags, the super sacks of hemp, that doesn't sit well with anybody that I've talked to. And so advocating for the farmer and doing what we need to do to mitigate some of the risk that the farmer has, that the farmer assumes when they get into growing a crop of hemp, is one of the things that we really need to address. And I know HIA is really gearing up to address that situation. The HIA has to take a role and they've already been doing that, you know. And I know from the people that I work with in the Kentucky HIA and the folks that have been transitioning on to the board in the national HIA, I know that focusing on helping the farmer and lifting up the farmer and promoting legislative changes that take the risk off the farmer. For example, the 1% THC as opposed to 0.3%. A lot of the varieties that we grow, if you're growing for cannabinoids, they straddle that 0.3% THC threshold pretty closely. And, you know, things like drought or things like environmental stresses, plants are coming from Colorado where they were raised, and farmer gets in Kentucky and the plants behave a little differently because you're in a different ecosystem. All of those things can cause those plants to spike. All of the risk for that is on the farmer. If that spikes and the State Department of Agriculture says, hey, you've got to destroy that crop, that's a loss of a summer's worth of labor. But it's not just that. I mean, that farmer could have been growing tomatoes on that land, which is a no risk. Well, it's not a no risk crop, but it's low risk compared to hemp, right? So there's a lot of ways you can look at it where that farmer is taking a potential loss because they wanted to try out hemp and get into hemp. But that same risk is not on the processors and handlers. Processors can mitigate their product. They can get their product down below 0.3% THC after they're extracting their flowers and getting the cannabinoids out of it. A farmer doesn't have that option. He just has, he or she has the option to either get it retested in Kentucky or destroy the crop. And so we really need to focus on ways to minimize that risk for the farmer. Get good insurance, get legislation that promotes good insurance for growing hemp crops. And that's starting, right? That's starting, that process is starting. But just making it easier, just making this crop more like an everyday crop for farmers. Education, legislation, policy changes to help that happen. That's what we really need for the farmer. This is not, oh, this is hemp, you know, it's hemp. This is hemp, or just like this is corn, or this is soybean, or this is tomatoes. When I went to college and trained to be an undergraduate, I was a microbiologist. But I always was very interested in the environment. My father took me outside all the time as a kid. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, and I was running around in the mountains and the hills and fishing in the creeks and playing in the creeks. And I was just very lucky to have a dad and parents who made sure that, you know, we got outside a lot. And that sort of fostered an appreciation for the outdoors and the environment. And fast forward, I got this microbiology degree, and I'm sitting in a cubicle and I'm thinking about, what can I do with this microbiology degree? I can either keep sitting in this cubicle, editing, you know, science papers, or I could maybe go back to graduate school and do something more with it. Or I could, you know, get a job analyzing stool samples in a hospital. You know, we need people to do that, but I didn't feel like that was my calling. So I wanted to apply it to the environment. And so I ended up trying to get into some microbiology graduate programs, and I was living in Maryland at the time. And I applied to Maryland's microbiology program, and they said, well, we don't really do environmental microbiology, but there's this guy over in agriculture. He's a soil scientist, and he's interested in this kind of stuff. His name was Ray Weil. He's great mentor, great teacher, both at research and, you know, he's a really good researcher, a really excellent teacher. I model a lot of the teaching that I do on his style. He's very energetic. I hope to someday have his levels of energy. You know, so he took me in, and that's kind of how I got into the agriculture part. And since then, I've, you know, been exposed to things like Wendell Berry, been exposed to the philosophies coming out of the Land Institute with Wes Jackson. And really just the more I've learned about the plight of modern farming, where we rely on 6 or 7 big staple crops, and really in the United States, it's corn, soybeans, and to a lesser degree, wheat and rice, right? And that's it. That's our big commodities, right? And we dedicate a lot of land to that, and we don't always use the best agricultural practices to manage that land. Some of the practices that we use are very degrading to the soil, degrading to the ecosystem. And so you could see here a kind of a logical progression to sustainable and organic farming. And I'm passionate about it. You know, I mean, that's fast forward to where I am now. I think you need to take it a step further, and it's got to be organic and sustainable farming focused in ecoregions. And when I say ecoregions, it's both economic regions and ecological regions, right? I mean, so it all ties together, and just making sure that we all understand that we all fit in a community, and it's not just our local community. Our communities don't necessarily have boundaries. We're all, this pandemic has really kind of highlighted that, hasn't it? We're all, you know, in communities that are maybe concentrated in certain areas, but then they, you know, branch out and interact. And we interact with our environmental community, our agricultural community, and we have to increasingly see ourselves as part of an ecosystem. And when we are participating in a local agriculture, and as consumers voting with our dollars on where we're getting our food to support the local agro ecosystems and agroeconomy, that's really, that's at the heart of it for me now. That's what I'm trying to get to in agriculture. And I think, again, hemp is part of that.